and creating ways to, buy their products and fulfill them. I think that's what we have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I would say to that like, not to be, Debbie Downer, but I would say nobody. I mean, Starbucks is probably the closest person to getting it right, to your point, but they also spent millions of dollars marketing this and advertising this, and like we were talking about in like the panel prep. For me, I think for a lot of the smaller guys that don't have that kind of money, I can't afford an Accenture, I can't afford a multi-million-dollar media budget, there's a lot of opportunity to leverage mobile devices, data, and technology and enhance the customer experience. So if you're a regional brand, instead of trying to do off-the-shelf geo-targeting or search retargeting from like a Criteo, go build your own custom targeting pool. Go enhance your own CRM program, inclusive of mobile alerts on the device. And, and we saw a presentation for those of the people that were here yesterday about the differences in 4G and 5G and what that means. To me, that means there's an opportunity to do this without necessarily having to get a customer to have an app on their phone. Because Starbucks, I think the statistic I read is about 1 in 4 people that walk in the door have an app on their phone. Your average QSR brand is, it's like, what, 1 in 25, 1 in 50 people that walk in the door having the app on the phone. But every single person that walks in your door has an email on their phone. So if you can tag the device through creating like wireless charging stations and free Wi-Fi and get people to opt in, you can get a tag on that device and that user's email and create a dialogue with that customer as part of a CRM program that doesn't necessarily mean to get them to download an app that they might forget's on their phone. And so I agree. Starbucks is probably the closest there. The Domino's thing, I think it's a cute story, but I think it's an ad campaign. It's not that damn good, right? So I would say nobody's doing it right, but yeah, there's a massive opportunity still there for the taking.
I always order a pizza in the park.
Doesn't everybody?
Yeah, on the subway. That's the absolute location.
Well, especially now that cannabis is legal, like I'm always wanting pizza in the park.
All right, so let's go to like a data story. So we heard a lot about data inputs. We heard about data science, marketing science. How does data really drive, business outcomes? Can you give me like an example?
Yeah. We look at data from a psychological all the way to performance perspective. And so for us, not just looking at what worked in the past, how do we repeat that, what's the new beta opportunity from like our media partner or whoever, but really looking at consumer and their data as a whole. What are they doing in the store? What are their motivations? How have they also interacted with our media? And tying all of those together to understand what they need from us really helps us change the businesses of the QSRs we're working with. But I think the way that we're trying to look at advertising for QSRs is more around how can we actually offer something to our consumer and change the business, whether that's like including Coke freestyle machines or if that's just a new ad placement on Facebook, so that we're understanding what they're telling us they need and then making changes off of that can then make them repeat customers, loyalists, whatever.
Yeah, I think the real opportunity is taking things that over the years we've all done in digital media with tracking and tagging and dynamic personalization, but taking it outside of the traditional marketing vehicle. And because if you think about what Uber's doing, that it's not a media company. I was on a panel yesterday, we talked about Amazon, divorce Amazon as an advertising vehicle and a walled garden, of just how they're changing consumer expectations of a brand. And then you talk about how people are trying to innovate, and we don't know if it'll work or not, but I remember reading a couple weeks ago an article on McDonald's and how they're trying to pilot a program now where they're going to get rid of the cashiers. So you always think about how AI and artificial intelligence and automation is going to replace people, but which people is it replacing? It's not replacing the guy in the kitchen cooking the food, even if it's a fast food chain. What they're going to do is replace the cashier where the mistakes happen in the ordering, and instead I just go into McDonald's, I sit at a table, and either I use some sort of a tablet on the table and do my order, or for free Wi-Fi and wireless charging, I use my own phone, and instead of doing the app, I'm using a light mobile application via the browser right? And Steve Jobs talked about this years ago that, yeah, while 80+% of inventory right now with mobile is in-app, there's an increasing trend to just mobile web and mobile activity. And if I can then order at the table to the order I want, table service now is being introduced into a McDonald's environment, because instead of paying bodies to just ring in an order and punch a screen, I can punch a screen myself, and I can sit at the table with my wife and my kids, and somebody will just bring the food to the table for me. And that creates a data opportunity for McDonald's to build a custom retargeting program off of. It allows them to build their own bespoke targeting, and with GDPR and changing privacy regulations, they're now proactively compliant. And operationally, it's more efficient because they don't need 5 cashiers. They just need one 25-year-old to run food on trays to tables. So it's more cost effective too.
I agree, but not everyone's McDonald's, right? I mean, not everyone has this super huge budget. So how do smaller brands or companies test and learn? Like, how do you get through this huge data overwhelming challenge without a lot of money?
Yeah, I actually think McDonald's is sort of leading the pack there, but I think it's a fairly simple execution. I mean, I couldn't agree more with Rob, which I hate saying on panels because they make them boring, but...
Kumbaya, we're all going to hug in a second.
Yeah, exactly. But Rob's point is so salient. I mean, we're talking about labor savings when it's actually a data play. And so the fact that, somebody can create, even using, a third-party app like Level Up, to create that experience in store where you can minimize the interaction that you have with a human being, which sounds really impersonal, but actually ironically creates personalized experiences for you as the customer. If I can take that data point and I can address it from that customer experience in store, from that data point that I'm putting into an app, into a browser, into a kiosk, and I can bring that up to the marketing, the point of having this disconnection between the marketing channel and the CX channel in restaurant, those things are converging, and they need to converge. I think what McDonald's is doing is an example, a very simple example of doing that, but I don't think you need to have a McDonald's-sized budget or footprint to be able to do it. I think there's plenty. I think a lot of the smaller brands are actually using some of these third-party apps to start to do that. One thing I will caveat, though, if you're using a third-party app like Revel or Level Up, just make sure if you're a QSR, you are getting that data back. All the data that you can. Do not create a disintermediation between that data and the data that you guys have as the brand. Make sure that you have access to that.
Yeah.
So explain that a little more, because I think connecting the data dots is like, sometimes we add on, but we're not cohesive in our connection and our matchback, so.
Yeah, I know from the analyst side, I'm sure that's really frustrating. From the data side and technology side, that could be frustrating as well, but it's not that hard to do. I mean, you have silos of data as any marketer. Rob and I have been doing this for a long time, and we've been dealing with this for a long time, but there is, it's gotten simpler to connect those pieces. So it's not a matter of, oh my God, this is a huge undertaking. I have to have multiple technology teams across the globe doing this. It's as simple as figuring out the right data that you want to aggregate together. It could be your POS data, it could be your app data, it could be your site data, it could be your CRM data. Combining those things together are not really hard to do. This is not a huge project, but you need to do it. And that's going back to Rob's point. Again, I'm agreeing with you vehemently. You need to do it. That's where you should be starting. Some of these proof of concept crazy ideas out there in terms of what app I need to build for X millions of dollars to make it, a really cool marketing program, great. But start with your first party data, aggregate it together, and make sure you don't have gaps, and use that as your starting point.
Yeah, what I would say to build on that is, don't overthink things sometimes. I think that's the biggest mistake that often happens. Like, you don't have to go spend 6 digits on a fancy Visual IQ or some other company to do this big fancy attribution platform. You have data in different sources, and just be smart about it and look at it directionally. If you do a mobile geofence targeted campaign, look at your average traffic volumes at that season, at that time of day, at that day of week. What was the average traffic and order volume per day? What was the average order amount per customer? And if you're doing that demand sort of creation on the front end, you should be able to see an incremental lift on the back end, even if it's not directly in a linear fashion attributable in a fancy dashboard and a sexy report from a company that you're spending 6 digits on. There's basic math that you can do. And I think where he was going with that I agree with also is, for all the brands in the room, and you're going to do this stuff, take ownership of your technology and your data stacks. You can still use an agency. You can still use a managed service, but they shouldn't own the technology and the data because that is your brand's IP. An analogy I always use with people is, people talk about this cliche of data being the new oil, and your raw first-party data, while valuable, is crude oil. Crude oil won't power a machine. Crude oil or raw data will not power a dynamic, personalized marketing engine. You need to refine the oil. And if you don't own your own tech stack and somebody else does, that refined oil is their IP, not yours. So you have to take ownership of that to be able to do these things. And I agree, you don't need a big, massive budget or a big, fancy attribution platform. There's some just basic block and tackling marketing fundamentals that you can still do.
So from a media perspective, how do you help brands with that sort of challenge? Because I think a lot of brands are like overwhelmed, to your point, of who's going to own it, how are you going to help me, how are we going to integrate?
Totally. I think all of this is great, but a lot of our clients, especially smaller QSR, you even say DMP, and all of a sudden it's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Let's not do this. It's hard. Just go to Facebook, right? And it's our job as their partner to make sure that they understand the purpose of a DMP and how it sets, if DMP is the right answer to whatever the problem is, how it sets up the foundation for what we need to do in the future. I think also as agencies, at least from a Publicis standpoint where we're afraid of everything, we don't own any data, we refuse. GDPR, the client owns it all, so anything we are doing is just interpreting their internal data, but we can help them set that up. So when we think about QSRs, we're thinking a lot about like MR and how that's probably going to be the new cell phone in the next 5 to 10 years. So why focus right now if I have a small client on building an app or having, a drone give you fries or whatever it is, when I really just need to start grabbing data from my customers in a very easy way, a small S3 bucket, it's not that hard. We just need to explain it to the clients and help them understand the roadmap for how that data is going to be beneficial for them in the future.
So one trigger on that, because we're saying simplify in a complex world, but how much do you really see of AI coming to life? Because do you think it's here today? Do you think it's way out in the future? Who's using it?
Well, let's be real. AI's not real. It's fake at this point. We've made algorithms. Hitting a key on a keyboard is an algorithm. We just have machine learning at this point. So actual artificial intelligence is not being used. If whoever cracks it's not in this room because they'd be a trillionaire by now, right? I think that anyone can introduce machine learning and small algorithms in small ways to their clients, to their brand. So for example, we've created a very simple script that helps us then tag all of the assets that are in market. And now we're using AI, but it's really just helping us cut down labor costs. I don't need 3 analysts going through 60,000 ads now. I've got one script being managed by a half of an engineer FTE that's just making sure we've got the tags there. And it's just a small step to show if we can automate this and cut you from 2 FTEs to 0.5, imagine what else we could start automating as we get this data layer under control.
Yeah, I would say on that, similarly, I think when you think about it, it's everybody talks about big data and all this stuff, but I think at the end of the day, it's about little data and little executions and little wins that can have a big impact in your business. And in part of that, like you were saying, right, clients get scared off on a DMP, but I think it's important for the audience to understand that not all DMPs are created equal. Every DSP, every managed services partner you work with, every programmatic platform, any bid management solution has technically their own DMP. It doesn't have to be a crux and a standalone third-party DMP that you're spending $100 and something thousand a year on. So understanding your company and your brand and what your goals are, because if you're not going to do a more of a Starbucks or a McDonald's-y 360 integration, you probably don't need to spend 6 digits on crux. The DMP that's for free attached to your DSP is probably good enough if you just simply want to take your customer profile data and make some audience segmentation so you can buy smarter programmatic media and better geo-target. Maybe you don't need the big fancy standalone DMP. So also understanding that there's a lot of flavors of DMP and everybody's got a DMP, but they all do different things. The value of a third-party standalone DMP at like Salesforce and a Crux or Oracle's or any of these guys is you want that data to start going both ways. You want to put the media optimization data into optimizing your CRM program and the in-store or in-location customer experience, But if you really only want to use your customer data to buy better media, don't spend the money. Like, you can still get value from it. So that's where focusing on, never mind big data, focusing on small data, small executions, small wins, I think becomes really important. And that's how the smaller ones, particularly if you're a mid-market regional QSR and you're like sub 30 locations and you can't afford a Zenith or a Havas, or you can't afford a MediaMath, like, that's how you go about it in a more practical way. And going back to my comment before about sort of like old school grassroots analytics, I remember, you know, in the mid 90s working in this industry and buying search ads back in the day, that I couldn't track anything. But if I was working at an agency and I wanted to get more search budget, I would simply look at my data in Google to show that, hey, you ran a TV spot in the Super Bowl and your search queries on your brand terms are up 1,500% over the next 4 days. That's attributable. And I can use that to then go buy better and change my budgets, change my allocation. So there's smart ways to do it. And it doesn't have to be a big fancy dashboard. It doesn't have to be a big attribution platform. It doesn't have to be a 6-digit budget with a Crux or somebody like that. There's still ways to use that data in smart ways for little wins.
Yeah, I try to tell also clients, don't, just because you can do everything doesn't mean you should, right? I mean, and blow all your budget. How would you advise clients to kind of dip their toe into personalization, or to sort of step into it, and whether that be budgetary, whether that to be like their first step?
I mean, I can address it from a technology perspective and perhaps a budgetary perspective, but, you know, we've talked about this in different ways. And the term first-party data or customer data. Having access and having, you know, aggregated first-party customer data is the first start. If you don't have that, and most brands don't, it's not a QSR problem, it's every brand, every marketer has this challenge. There's, and I think we've addressed this in the last question, I've written a couple articles on it too. There's FOMO in our space. People read trades and they're like, I need that 3-letter acronym thing in my MarTech stack. And they spend a lot of money on it. And they don't get the value out of it because they're not addressing the underlying issue. I need to have my data centralized so that I can personalize. That alone, saying those things, it's not hard to do. This is not 4 pieces of technology in my MarTech stack to be able to deliver that. That's not having 20 vendors that I need to deal with and 3 agencies across the globe to do it. This is fairly simple for any brand to do. You need to take a step back. If that's what you're trying to do, personalize an experience. Find the right partner to do it, aggregate the data, first-party data first. You can worry about models, AI, third-party data. You know, there's plenty of data out there that you can throw into the mix. Start with your customer data, expand it as you can to its natural limits, and then connect it. Connect it through the different engagement channels that you're working with. That could be as simple as media channels like search, social, and display, programmatic. It could be out of home, digital out of home. It could be connected TV. It could be even direct mail, email, and just general print. You can do that in a personalized way without a lot of effort, without having 20 partners, without spending a ton of money.
Yeah, I would say on that, just 2 sort of comments to that. I was going to say 2 quick comments, but I don't think I say anything quickly. So I'm just going to remove quick from that. So 2 comments. Is one, you know, if you're trying to do this on your own, you're trying to do it on a budget. What I mean by when I said before about taking ownership of your tech stack means unbundling the service, because a lot of this geo-fencing and geo-targeting and the media capabilities that we're talking about doing, if you're using a managed service black box partner like a Velasys or a Quantcast or a Criteo, and you're paying a fixed CPM, there's data and services and technology and fees that go into that, and it restricts your insight and your knowledge and the levers that you're able to optimize your media on. I equate that to something similar to like a car service. I paid $100, the guy picked me up from my house and took me to the airport. I don't know if that $100 went to the driver, went to the insurance, went to the gas, went to the car payment. Unbundle that, and so push your partners for dynamic pricing and know what you're paying for the technology, what you're paying for the data, what your standalone media CPM is, and what you're paying for a service fee for the bodies to optimize it for the campaign for you, particularly if anybody isn't doing it in-house, self-serve. It's very akin to me of what like Nike does. Nike doesn't even make their own sneakers anymore. They outsource that and contract that out to some other guy that can make them better, faster, cheaper. And that's fine as long as you've unbundled that car service and that analogy, and you know where your costs are and what will drive the performance of your business and drive operational efficiencies. The second comment I would say is go back to 1967 when Lester Wunderman coined the term at a speech at MIT of what direct marketing is. And there's like 7 principles of how he defines them about removing the intermediary in the middle, creating a dialogue between a brand and a consumer, driving cost efficiencies. At the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. And in some cases, I think people get scared off, particularly with the smaller brands, and they're worried about how far their budgets are going to go. They overthink getting a linear, quantifiable attribution model, and they're not looking at it directionally. Because for a lot of brands, and we've worked with Rise Alliance, a number of clients with mid-market, sort of regional QSRs, tier 2 dealerships, and even some real estate groups. And sometimes, if you take a geo filter, and then you put an audience filter on top of that, like, I can't spend like $200 a month for you. So sometimes if you look at that Lester Wunderman model and those principles, one of the key components of that is cost efficiency. So if your click-through rate is dog shit and you have a terrible conversion rate, but you're getting enough reach and you're looking at your sales data and you know that traffic's up in your location and you know sales are up from doing this activity, and if you've unbundled everything and you know where your costs are, you have more control to drive performance. And sometimes, again, the Lester Wunderman model, look at direct mail. Sometimes we need to treat digital like direct mail and go old school on the tactic. And sometimes waste is okay if the price is right.
Well, that's cool. I'm an old school DM direct marketer, so. Question, how do we create?
They just want to hear me talk more.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's what happened there.
Okay. Tell us how data can actually bring to life the customer in different ways. And I'm not saying like the millennial or the age demographic, but how can we really understand those audience and sub-audiences in a new way and really help inform the whole experience?
Yeah, I think we try not to look at age groups so much. There's core motivations that every age group has just from an evolutionary standpoint as humans. And we start by looking at things like that. So there's an effect called the licensing effect. It's the reason why when McDonald's introduced salads, their fry sales doubled. It's essentially that as humans, if we do something that we perceive to be good, we then allow ourselves to do something bad or like treat ourselves. So that doesn't matter if you're a millennial, if you're a boomer, male, female, that's somewhere within our psyche. And then we can leverage that within our media. So if we're then targeting people with a burger that have just joined a gym, we're now influencing you to cheat on your new lifestyle, but it works. And then that helps us contextualize more of the consumer, so we can then throw in our average targeting and normal and understand, well, for my brand, these demographics, these triggers play more with this sort of mindset and go into that. That can then change our creative, change more targeting parameters, and help us if we are trying to personalize things. So if I'm now serving dynamic carousel ads for a CPG brand, it might be like I'm showing you diapers for your kids and golf clubs. We can apply that to QSR as well to bring just these motivational triggers to life. Very cheap way to do things. It doesn't require a ton of creative changes, and you can layer it onto the targeting you already have.
I think diapers and golf clubs could be a reality show. Like that.
It's the name of my first book, actually. Yeah.
What I think is smart about that for the audience, to add some additional context to that, what I really like about that is that test and learning and sort of really seeing what it's at versus going in with an arbitrary marketing playbook of like, this is my audience, and actually seeing who your audience really is. Because one of the challenges with digital also is the flaw in the data that we use for our targeting. Right? I'm 45 years old. I skied 50 days this year, but I also have 3 kids. So depending on which, and by the way, anybody in here, like if you have a DMP partner or a third-party data partner, you can provide email addresses and actually challenge them and tell you how they, in their system, label you, like what segments do you fall in, right? And like for me, it's not and, it's all ors. So you're gonna target me as a 45-year-old dad, or a a ski bum that skis 50 days a year, or a foodie, or somebody that likes gin and tonics, or the data platforms, it's always, in many cases, ors. And I'm really all these people. So if you over-focus on that data and that segmentation, you might be hitting me the wrong way, because maybe I don't have my 45-year-old dad hat on right now. Maybe I'm the ski bum pretending I'm not 45 with 3 kids. So you got to talk to me a little bit differently in that moment. And your model, what you were describing, really allows you to dynamically optimize that messaging to maintain a level of relevancy and overcompensate for flawed data.
Well, I see segments and tribes, or whatever you want to call them, as trash, because to your point, if we're looking at people that go to SoulCycle, well, they might only be SoulCycle enthusiasts in the morning. Right. And so if my media for my burger company is running in the afternoon towards SoulCycle, it doesn't matter, because now they're putting their rave hat on. And a raver and a SoulCyclist within a DMP or a targeting group, 2 completely different people, but most likely, I mean, maybe I've got my New York glasses on, but same person at the end of the day. And so now we've created ways for ourselves trying to be smarter with all these segments and sub-segments that now we're making creative for. It just ends up being a large endeavor for not a lot of buck.
How do you see, so all of this insight and all of this understanding with consumers and your customer, how do you see it working well for brands so they're sharing it across sort of the entire supply chain? Like maybe who's doing it well, what's an example, how are you helping, train brands along? But I think that internal connective tissue is so important.
What do you mean by supply chain?
I think data can actually, well, you tell me. I think it can influence product development. I think it can influence more than just the customer experience in store. I think it, you can add more services because of it. But
yeah, I think when I think omnichannel, I think most people when they say omnichannel think about it from a media perspective or a marketing perspective, and I think that's fairly flawed. Going back to my previous comment about the CX, the customer experience, and the marketing data, those sort of 2 data sets, or traditionally 2 data sets converging, if that's not happening at your company, it's gonna, and it should be. So how do you use that data? If you're Subway and you have 2,600 restaurants, 26,000 restaurants in the US, how do you actually use data that you could be getting from your customers when they're in the restaurant, when they are going by a restaurant, when they're going by competitors' restaurants, when they're engaging with your marketing? How do you use that to plan out where your next restaurant's going to be? And how do you look at your footprint and optimize that based upon that data? That seems crazy, but what other data set do you have that can let you do that more effectively than the data that you're collecting from that customer on a real-time basis? I saw at a retail show, I saw the Gap talk about, the CEO of the Gap talk about how they're starting to plan their stores, and their stores are going to be a smaller footprint put next to Trader Joe's. They're using data on their customers' behavior and what they're doing outside of buying apparel from the Gap or one of their competitors, and they're applying it from a location basis based upon their competitors. Not even competitors, non-endemic competitors, non-endemic brands. But using that data to plan better. We are in that mode right now. We have that data. We should be using it. And then crafting the customer experience in the store, drive-through, pickup. Bear Burger mentioned BOPIS, like seeing BOPIS in a restaurant context made me happy. Obviously, retailers are focused on buying online and picking up in store. So there's a move there. The one thing I will say, on the other side, we're talking about payment and fulfillment through kiosks and through apps. The one other thing I'm seeing that I just want to caution against in this space is as QSRs are moving more towards delivery and using third parties for that, being the Domino's driver back 20-something years ago, you need to own the data from that fulfillment. That experience is still your experience, and that data is still your data. So if you're partnering with an Uber Eats or a DoorDash or a Caviar, make sure that you are getting access to that data, insisting upon access, because that is part of your customer journey, and any hiccups there, and all the data that they're collecting there from time to drop off is affecting your brand. Make sure you are collecting that data.
Yeah, and I think as an extension of that, also, when you're dealing with a lot of these third-party companies that offer these solutions, they're also aggregating that data, and they're selling advertising to non-endemic advertisers within their ecosystem in their walled garden. So be smart about the partners you're talking to and understand their business model. So if some of them you might have a direct data deal with, and all of your data comes right back to you, and the partner is not allowed to use your data, well, you're going to pay a premium for that. Maybe you're cool with allowing them to aggregate and anonymize your data for contextual insights and put it into a data co-op of 16,000 other QSRs. And if they're going to do it, a lot of people get afraid of that, but I would say you can let them do that if you then get that shared insight back. And that's where I think you can create a lot of opportunity of, you know, like if I'm Chick-fil-A in Austin, I want to be next to the spin studio, but in Boston, I want to be next to the yoga studio, and in New York, I want to be next to the Lids hat store for some reason. But if you're aggregating all that data up, you can get insights back from these partners that can help you optimize on. So you don't necessarily always have to do that data heavy lifting on your own. So in some cases, to get a discount on the media and working with the partner and even a delivery service, you can let them have access to your data and anonymize it for industry level wide insights, as long as you get that back and you can use that yourself.
Yeah, I would say a third party, you're using a third party, but that is not third party data. That is your data. And make sure you're leveraging it to the best of your ability. When I talk about starting from that first party data, customer data perspective, that's data as well that you should be leveraging for your marketing.
I think a lot of times we talk about customer journey and no one talks about that data journey. And if you just do that audit to find what those blind spots are, I think are hugely rewarding. Anything that's sort of overlooked in the QSR space right now that's a big opportunity that no one's talking about? We see a lot being like, you know, hey, I've got an app, download my app, or hey, you know, I'm doing some retargeting. Is there anything sort of interesting that you think is just a simple, overlooked opportunity?
I think the missed opportunity is right now, I think everybody in the category is overly focused on download my app, download my app, download my app, download my app. You know, like we talked about before, Starbucks spent millions and millions of dollars, so 1 in 4 people who walk into Starbucks have your app, but your average person is way, way worse than that. And with 5G coming, like, to me, the simple opportunity is don't bother with that. But you should offer wireless charging, enhanced ordering, remembering what people order, and I think that's an area like Starbucks in particular does really, really well. And that way, if you get my email address and my device ID, like, you're better able to create a dialogue as part of a CRM program. And I think that's just a missed opportunity, because right now the fever is like download my app, and the reality is you know, if you get 100 people to download your app, 50% of them are going to use it once. 50% of the people that use it once are probably never going to come back again. And the reality is, out of 100 people that you spend all this marketing dollars to download your app, you're going to get 1, maybe 2 people to use it. So I think the opportunity and the overlooked piece is stop with the obsession of download my app and just focus on using the device and mobile as a consumer access point and get to that customer via that device in a meaningful way.
Can we just do what our customer wants from us, though? Because like, that's the biggest marketing challenge. I constantly have clients say, our problem is we need more millennials. Well, that's not your problem. Your problem is you're not making anything millennials want. So I can go reach a ton of millennials, but if I'm offering them a retirement home, like, that doesn't make any fucking sense. So can we not just take a look at why millennials aren't choosing our brands, or why whatever we're trying to solve with an app, can we just make a different product? Can we make a different experience, not just push media as a Band-Aid to reach people? Let's provide them with something.
Right, and I think part of it is, you know, are we asking the right questions of the data? It's not that the data is the magic 8-ball that are going to tell you everything, right? And I think setting up those appropriate business questions and problems to know what you're solving for helps us.
Well, I think you have to go into it sort of eyes wide open, because the data shouldn't be a black and white answer. More often than not, the data should make you ask more questions and dig into what's going on and make you ask more questions and ask yourself how you can refine that experience, how you can offer a better product, how you can create operational efficiencies, how you can drive more top-line revenue. And again, the data is not the answer to all of that. The data just helps you ask better questions. And the more questions you ask, the more data you look at, the better your questions get and the better the results come over time.
I would say the one thing, going back to the customer journey, that I feel like brands are missing out on, or maybe not doing as good a job as they can be, is around loyalty. So I think that going back to the download my app, like that, I think perceived by marketers is if they have my app, they're a loyal customer. If they use my app and they get stars or points or whatever it might be, they're a loyal customer. And I think it's a little bit of a simplification of the loyalty that a customer has toward the brand if they're just collecting something to get something for free. Now, it's definitely a viable option in terms of promotion, and obviously you want to use that data to create these types of engagements and to try and get repeat visitation and repeat purchase. But there are plenty of other ways that you can then take that data, personalize experiences through marketing, through customer experience in the restaurant, to create loyalty. Airlines are fairly good at this, not all of them, but Delta's pretty good at this in terms of convincing me that I need to always fly Delta. Why? Because I'm chasing miles, but you know, they might hook me up and upgrade me every once in a while. They might let me sit in the lounge for a couple hours.
But I think that goes back to, you know, you mentioned earlier the comment, and I'm a big advocate of that statement of, in the world of digital, just because I can doesn't mean I should. And I encourage everybody in the room, when you're thinking through marketing strategies with digital, use yourself as a focus group of one, because going back to your point, like, if I'm just chasing free deals, that's fine, but you're going to want to talk to that person very differently than somebody else that's an advocate of the brand. And you can actually start to even make a lot of assumptions and implications that you can test out in marketing. Just think about mobile devices for a second. You know, a lot of people have argued for years that the iPhones are always just catching up to what Samsung did in last year's model, right? But why can I get two Samsung 10s for $50 and an iPhone 10 costs me $1,000? Because Apple has shuttered their iAd business and they're selling to the audience that I only use your data to use more Apple products. I'm a better company. The person using the Android phone in many cases, you know, my brother's one of them, and I have all my kids on Apple products, but my brother likes the Androids because he knows he's getting tracked. But he doesn't care because it's a cheaper service. He gets a better phone for less money. So you're going to want to talk to that iPhone person very, very differently than the Android person. And then you also have to be really careful about your targeting. Because if you use like a mobile geofenced in-app targeting program and you overhit the Apple user, you might rub that guy the wrong way because he thinks he's using an Apple phone for privacy. So you got to think about the frequency and communication and how you get the data to get to the customer at the same time.
Great. All right. Do we have time for a few questions? Absolutely. Okay, cool.
Bueller?
Any-
Number 10, please.
Come on, we were a lively panel. There's no questions.
If nobody asks questions, I'm going to start doing stand-up.
Go ahead. In the back.
Actually, I'm going to take this mic, run that to that person back there, please. And if you need to answer, you can use the podium.
Run, Forrest, run.
Sorry, if you need.
Hey guys, I'm Will. I work on a lot of local and franchise business, and part of my struggle with data is getting the national teams to release that to a lot of our local groups, which is pretty much just a no, just about every time. But when they're activating that data, obviously they should be activating it locally. So how do I tell that story to get a piece of that data pie?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, the other option I've seen when I've worked with sort of regional chains, and even bigger chains, back in my Havas days, I worked on the Choice Hotel business, right? And they've got 8 brands within the Choice Hotels portfolio, like 5 are mid-scale, 3 are economy. So then they have 2 associations for mid-scale and economy. Then they have the US divided up into 13 sub-regions. And then you have the individual franchisees on that. So there was data trapped at the national level, at the mid-scale and economy cluster level, at the individual brand level, and down to the franchisee. And sometimes I've found when you can't get the data from the top back down, if you start working with the local level providers and working with the right partners, you can start building the data up, right? And then actually getting some small data wins and showing how at a regional level or at a sort of smaller microcosm as a proof of concept, how this data was then to be useful, and you can show that up the food chain. I tend to find that usually it does take time, but that'll start loosening the screws they have on the lockbox that they keep the national data in. And so sometimes you got to go the other way around, build it from the bottom up instead of trying to get it from the top down.
Yeah, hospitality is a vertical that has that. Automotive is a vertical that has that. QSR. Yeah, it's a matter of proving the value. And I agree with Rob. Starting from the bottom and going up is usually the better way. It's harder from the top down. It's a lot of work, but it's not. It's fairly universal across a lot of verticals. Not just QSR.
Well, in the bottom up, like not only does it give you better data that's more actionable on like a small data window from like small executions and small wins, also you got to remember when you're dealing with somebody at the national level at these brands, the amount of pressure they're under to keep their job, right? So if he releases this data and something goes wrong, he has a greater risk of being scapegoated and taking a fall over it not going good versus the benefit and the upside if he does it right. So the risk is greater than the reward. So you got to remember when you're dealing with the national guy, that's another can of worms, and that's where for separate reasons, bottom up also makes sense.
We're going to take one more question here in the back.
Yep, in the back here.
Go ahead.
Hey guys, so good explanation.
Dude, you promised me a softball question, man. Don't do this to me.
Here you go. So the problem is, and I know you love politics within the agency world, Rob. So I'd argue that the information or the data that you're getting from the local, to your point, is more important than a lot of what the national is doing for splashy ads and awareness functions, where local can show you more along the lines of purchase data, visitation, all that good attribution type stuff. The politics of the agencies that exist, especially the big boys, are like, well, I can't share this local information and that data with someone else because the big agency doesn't want to talk with the client and the client doesn't want to hear from two different agencies, or it's all a big fight, so information sharing doesn't take place. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a challenge,
I'm
right?
Eric from ThinkNear.
Yeah, and think near everybody. Thanks for the question, sales pitch in the form of a question.
Oh, snap.
I think it's not just data, right, at agencies. And you're at a big agency, and I've spent a lot of years at Havas, and you've been selling in agencies forever. Like, you know, with some of these activities, like I found even in my Havas days, like, is it a performance campaign? Is it a programmatic campaign? Is it a social campaign? Is it a mobile campaign? And all of those divisions are fighting over control of that budget. So that's just a big agency problem, and data is just a part of that.
Yeah, and I think from a big agency perspective, we would say is we put together a task force. So, I mean, it's client, it's agency, it's media, it's like the data analytics, and we come together and we map through of what the value is that. So I'm a big believer of bring all those smart minds together, and we've gotten huge traction across local, global to get it done when you have the right people talking to each other.
As the guy with the least agency experience, although I have some, I go back to Rob's point. Like the data and the data stack is owned by the marketer. So if the agency's stopping that collaboration, I think it's incumbent upon the marketer to force it. Now, granted, there's different marketers here at different levels, but the reality is the marketer owns this. There should not be this agency politics stopping that from happening, and we got to stop.
Another
We're
question?
so making out when this panel's
We got
over.
one more back here.
Hi, Suze Lampert from Gas Buddy. One question, just switching gears. What are your thoughts on data being collected from personal assistants? So Alexa, Google, Home, how does that play into the mix? And are we not there yet? Or?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of times as marketers, again, we're treating Alexa skills, we're treating Google Home skills as an app of like, you got to do this, but if we pretend that we've provided the customer something they want, the input that comes out of voice assistants, things like sentiment, things like null logs, customers are literally telling us with their mouths what they want from us, and we can pull that data out and then make decisions on it. So I don't care how many people are using my Alexa skill, but if 300 of them are using it, what are they actually asking Alexa to do from my brand? What's the sentiment that they're showing? and ultimately how often are they using it so that we can then use that for decisions. I think that voice, I mean, everyone's been told this 1,000 times, is probably the way we're going, especially with MR. So if people are telling us and it's in their home focus group of one, let's actually listen to that data and understand what they're saying.
I think the voice, to your point, is spot on that, because at the end of the day, right, just treat these voice-activated mechanisms, it's just an extension of search. It's just a new way to search for shit, right? And it's somebody raising their hand saying, I want this. And then you want to understand the context and the sentiment around that so you can personalize what you're going to put in front of that consumer at that time. So again, like, while it's fancier, it's newer, it's on different devices, at the end of the day, it just, to me, reminds me a lot of search, right? It's just how I'm accessing information.
Thank you. Over to you, Lunch.
Thank you very much. Great panel.